Good evening. I'm Marlowe, and this is Marlowe's Evening Radio. There is a taxi light glowing outside the studio window tonight, though I do not think the street below is where it began its route. It has that patient yellow look of something that has crossed a great distance and is still willing to wait at the curb. Our account this evening comes from the night archives, from a driver who worked the quiet route between planets, moons, rain layers, crystal valleys, marsh kitchens, and cities that did not always stay where maps had left them. The record concerns a single night shift in an interplanetary taxi. 4 passengers, 4 addresses, and 4 very different ideas of home. The driver speaks only when needed. Most of the story belongs to the beings who sat in the back seat and answered the simple questions one asks on a long ride through the dark. The first thing people misunderstand about interplanetary taxi work is the distance. They imagine distance as the hard part. They ask how long it takes to cross from a harbor moon to a cloud planet, or whether the fare rises when one leaves a local star group, or how a car that still has rain marks on the windshield can pass through a gate that bends light around 3 suns. Those are fair questions, but they belong mostly to people who have never driven the night route. Distance is not the hard part. Arriving is... A planet is not only a place. A moon is not only a round stone with weather on it. A station, a valley, a floating district, a market ring, a sleeping city that walks during fog season, all of them have rules about arrival. Some will let you approach only if the headlights are lowered. Some require the wheels to remember a local road before touching down. Some allow passengers to leave only through the door facing yesterday's wind. Several do not like engines to idle. One small moon past the Blue Orchard Belt will not permit a taxi to land unless the driver can produce a polite shadow. That is why I kept my shadow license folded in the visor. It was not my most valuable document, but it was the one most often questioned by border lamps. The license looked blank in ordinary light. Under a customs moon, it showed the outline of my shadow standing beside me, slightly tired, with a municipal stamp where the feet should have been. I renewed it every 2 years. More often if I had spent too much time near mirror fields. A passenger does not want to hear, at the edge of a planet made of patient fog, that the meter is willing but the shadow paperwork is not. My taxi looked old from outside. That helped. New vehicles make certain species uneasy. They shine too much. Their doors close with a certainty that sounds like a decision. Mine was low, long, and softly dented along the right rear panel, with a roof light that had learned 12 alphabets of invitation and a trunk that usually opened into the same dimension it had closed from. Usually is an important word in my trade. Inside, the taxi was less ordinary. The back seat could become a basin, a perch, a shallow mineral tray, a warm sling, a high back shell support, or a silence cradle, depending on who opened the door. The floor mats held star salt in their fibers no matter how often I beat them clean. The windows did not always show what was outside. Sometimes they showed what would be safe to look at, which is not the same thing. The glove compartment contained atmosphere, seals, toll seeds, a tin of translation moss, 3 folded route prayers from passengers who had insisted I keep them, and a small cloth pouch of coins accepted only by ferries that no longer existed. The meter sat where a meter should sit, beside the dashboard clock that never kept the same hour twice. It did not measure money directly, not first. It measured nearness. That was the old driver's word for it, though the company forms called it a domestic arrival index. The meter felt the weight of a passenger's departure, the looseness of the route, the difference between the air they were leaving and the air they needed, and the strange little resistance that gathers around beings who are almost home but not quite. By the end, it could name a fare. Before that, it only moved its amber needle through marks no passenger ever read correctly. Far, near, misremembered, weather crossed, not yet, home adjacent. I did not explain the meter unless asked. Most passengers had enough to carry. My shift began under the roof of the orbital taxi stand, where the lanes hung in dark rows above the night side of the city. Below us, the planet turned through clouds and street lamps. Above us, the smaller local moons waited in their assigned silences. The stand smelled of cold metal, old coffee, vacuum rain, and the wool blankets drivers kept folded over their knees between calls. There were other taxis in nearby lanes, some with sleeping drivers, some with no visible driver at all, one with its engine purring in a language used only by comets and elderly mechanics. I did the ordinary checks. Atmosphere seals first, door memory second, seat permissions third, no loose starlight under the pedals, no dream residue in the cup holders, translation moths alive, though two were pretending not to be. Trunk dimension matched the vehicle's current registration. Roof light responsive to hand signal, scent signal, and low-frequency prayer. Wheels willing to be wheels, skids if needed, fins only with notice. Meter needle resting on neutral. And then I let the taxi listen. Interplanetary drivers do not always find customers by standing at a curb. Some passengers raise a hand under the correct sky, but many do not have hands, and several have never seen a curb. Calls come through the roof light in different ways. A blue flicker means a physical pickup. A green warmth means a passenger is already between locations and needs a door to finish becoming available. A smell of burned sugar means a delayed child from a candy moon, though I had only taken one such fare, and the upholstery had hummed for a week afterward. A soft pressure behind the left ear means a dream frequency request. A drop of rain appearing inside the windshield means a weather address. The first call arrived as a drop of water rolling upward on the inside of the windshield. It did not fall. It climbed from the lower glass toward the roof, collecting light as it moved. When it reached the taxi lamp, the lamp glowed a cool gray blue and filled the cab with the smell of stone after quiet rain. The meter needle lifted, hesitated over, weather crossed, and settled near home adjacent. I touched the drop with one finger. The address entered through my glove and unfolded behind my eyes. Third cool rain layer. Westward drift balcony. Passenger waiting under borrowed awning. Shell humidity low. Door must not open into hot rain. I started the engine. The taxi did not roar. It cleared its throat softly, like a patient animal being asked to stand. The lane ahead opened from black to star blue. Below, the city lights blurred and became a map of possible departures. I turned the roof light to available, adjusted the cabin humidity by 2 degrees, and told the windows not to become sentimental. They fogged anyway, but only at the corners. That was acceptable. The first rule of the night route is that you do not hurry towards someone who is trying to get home. Hurrying carries a tone. Some passengers can hear it before they see the car, and then they bring that nervousness into the back seat with them. So I eased out of the taxi stand, crossed the first orbit lane, and let the wheels remember what a road had been before roads were drawn on planets. The gate opened in front of us as a thin line of rain. I drove through. For a moment there was no dashboard, no steering wheel, no city below, no roof light above. Only the sound of water choosing which world it wished to fall on. Then the tires touched a surface that was not ground but behaved politely enough, and the taxi rolled into the weather lanes above the rain planet. There are planets where the sky lies above the city. This was not one of them. On the rain planet, the sky had many floors. Warm rain drifted near the upper gardens, where broad leaves collected heat for the winter kitchens. Thin silver rain fell through the messenger districts, where letters traveled sealed inside droplets and arrived by tapping gently at windows. Heavy brown rain belonged to the dock levels, where cargo platforms sank in rows according to the patience of merchants. The third cool rain layer lay between all of these. A blue-gray band of soft falling water, gentle enough for shellfolk, cold enough to keep balconies awake, and quiet enough that a driver could hear a passenger thinking before the door opened. I followed the address by listening to the windshield. The passenger waited on a narrow platform beneath a borrowed awning that did not fit the local rain. The awning was too warm and kept steaming at the edges. Under it stood a cloud-shelled being with a round translucent shell rising from the back like a small weather dome. Inside the shell, pale vapor folded and unfolded slowly. The passenger wore a travel shawl pinned with 3 rain tokens, only one of which belonged to the layer we were in. I brought the taxi alongside and lowered the passenger side window 1 finger's width. "Third cool rain?" I asked. The being's shell misted with relief. Third cool rain, they said. If your door can keep out the warmer drops. I have seals. Good, my balcony has wandered. That was not the strangest reason anyone had given me for a ride. I opened the rear door into the correct humidity, and the seat reshaped itself into a curved shell support with a shallow basin for rainwater. The passenger climbed in carefully, bringing the smell of blue weather, wet stone, and a little embarrassment. I waited until their shell stopped fogging the roof liner. Where to? They pressed one rain token against the meter. The needle quivered, then shifted deeper into home adjacent. Westward drifts, they said. But not by map. It moved during the warm rain. I need to find which rain my home remembered. I turned the taxi into the layer, and the platform faded behind us. For a while, only rain spoke against the glass. Then, because a driver may ask one useful question if the road is long enough, I said, how does a home know which rain to stand under? The passenger looked toward the window, where thousands of drops were falling at the same angle, all of them certain they were arriving somewhere. In my city, they said, a home is less a building than a weather habit. The walls may stay in one place for a season or two, if the builders have tied them well and the platforms are feeling obedient, but the true address is the rain that learns your shell. A child can be carried through 6 districts blindfolded and still know home by the first drop that touches the back of the neck. Too warm, and the house belongs to kitchens or upper leaves. Too heavy, and it is for docks, cargo, and old ropes. Too bright, and it belongs to the messenger rain. But the right rain makes the shell open without asking. That is where one lives. They spoke without hurry, their voice softened by the vapor in the shell behind them. I kept the taxi in the third cool layer, adjusting the seals whenever warmer streaks fell across the lane. Outside the windows, platforms drifted like quiet thoughts. Some carried towers with sloped roofs and water wheels turning in the air. Some held gardens made of hanging cups, each cup catching a different kind of rain. Far below us, brown dock rain moved in slow sheets around cargo lights. Above, the warmer layers glowed faintly where kitchens were beginning their morning steam, though morning meant less there than weather did. The passenger touched one rain token after another, not to pay, but to remember. Our mornings begin with choosing which rain the body can bear, they continued. Those with old shells sit under soft blue drops until the hinges loosen. Young ones chase needle rain because it makes their vapor bright. Workers who mend balconies stand in mixed rain so they can hear when one layer has slipped into another. We do not open all windows at once. That is considered rude to the house and dangerous to letters. A letter arriving in thin messenger rain can dissolve if someone invites heavy dock rain through the wrong shutter. I asked only, and balconies wander often? They drift, the passenger said. Wandering sounds careless. A balcony follows pressure, warmth, remembered footsteps, and sometimes longing. Mine has been faithful for many seasons. It leans west during sleeping rain, lowers a little during festival mist, and returns to the third cool layer by the time the shell lamps wake. But during the last warm fall, the upper gardens released too much heat. Several balconies rose with the steam. Mine went with them, though my door remained where it was. The taxi passed between 2 slow platforms joined by a bridge of falling water. The bridge was not solid, but the local traffic used it as if it were stepping from drop to drop with umbrellas held low. I let the meter taste the air. The needle moved from home adjacent toward misremembered, then returned, undecided. That usually meant the passenger knew where home had been, but not where home had agreed to be now. The passenger looked embarrassed again, though the expression came mostly as the dimming in the vapor shell. At first I thought I had simply come home in the wrong rain. That happens. One returns tired, the shell is full of other weather, and a familiar platform looks strange. I stood at my door and waited for the balcony to lower. It did not. I sent a droplet message upward. It came back with orchard pollen on it. I sent another west. It returned colder than it should have been and carrying the smell of borrowed awning cloth. That was when I knew the balcony had not been stolen or broken. It was confused. Outside, the third cool rain grew thinner. I turned the taxi slightly downward, following the passenger's token rather than the map. The streets here were not streets in any ordinary sense. They were agreements between platforms, rain pressure, and the small lanterns that marked safe drift paths. A driver could not force a direct line through them. You had to let the wheels remember curves that had not yet become visible. The taxi did this well, better than I did sometimes. Then, in a fold between the third cool rain and a narrow western drift, a small lamp appeared. It did not shine toward us. It shone into the falling water, making each drop briefly visible before letting it vanish. Beneath it was a chair with a blue shell cushion, tilted slightly because one leg was shorter than the others. A balcony rail curved around both with the tired dignity of an old thing that had refused to let go of its purpose. The passenger made a sound that translation did not try to turn into a word. In our city, the passenger said, "We forgive a home for becoming confused. We confuse our homes often enough. We bring in the wrong steam from market pots. We hang hot laundry under cool eaves. We keep grief in rooms too long and wonder why the rain hesitates at the threshold." So I went to the registry of falling addresses, and the clerk there asked which part of my home was missing. I said the balcony. The clerk asked whether the balcony had taken the chair with the blue shell cushion. I said yes. The clerk asked whether it had taken the evening lamp. I said yes. Then the clerk said it had not left me. It had taken the parts of the house that still knew how to wait. We crossed a belt of warmer rain. The seals tightened, and the passenger drew the travel shawl closer. I did not speak. A driver learns when a passenger is telling the address and when they are telling the reason the address matters. Those are not the same thing, but both may be needed to arrive. The balcony belonged to the one who taught me rain, the passenger said after a while. Not by name. Names wash too quickly in my city, and we do not keep them in stories unless the listener has brought a dry bowl. The one who raised me used to sit on that balcony during third cool rain and sort the day's droplets. Some were messages, some were weather accounts, some were only water, which is also worth sorting. When I was small, I thought every falling thing had been sent. Later, I learned that many things arrive without intention and still deserve to be received. That was perhaps the first lesson of home. Their shell misted thickly, and for a moment the back seat smelled of old rain caught in woven mats. The meter needle trembled near home adjacent. Ahead of us, the rain layers divided like curtains. I saw several balconies drifting in the blue-gray band, each with its own little lamps and railings grown from wet metal. Some had potted cloud herbs, some had folded chairs tied to the rail. One had a sleeping animal shaped like a folded umbrella. None turned the passenger's shell brighter. I asked, "What should I look for?" "A lamp that does not shine outward," they said. "It shines into the rain. And a chair with one short leg. The balcony tilts when it is happy." That was enough. I slowed the taxi and let the headlights lower until they were no brighter than window glow. Too much light can frighten a drifting structure and make it rise into warmer weather. We moved between platforms, past lines of laundry dripping upward, past a post office where clerks in shell hoods were sorting droplets into porcelain gutters, past a school balcony where young cloud-shelled children sat under different rains to learn the first grammar of weather. The passenger watched all of it with the quiet attention of someone approaching a place they might not find. I brought the taxi alongside without touching the platform. The meter needle moved to near, then to a mark that did not always appear, recognized. The door seal tested the rain and opened only when the layer matched the passenger's shell. They did not leave at once. They sat with one hand on the travel shawl and one hand on the nearest rain token, looking at the balcony as if it had been both foolish and faithful. "It found the third cool rain again," I said. "No," the passenger answered softly. "It waited where the third cool rain would remember us." That was better, so I accepted the correction. They stepped out carefully, shell first, then shawl, then the small bag that had been kept dry through several wrong layers. The balcony lowered by a handspan as they placed one foot on it, enough to show recognition. The lamp brightened inward. The chair tilted more than before, which I took to mean happiness. The passenger turned once at the rail and touched 2 fingers to the shell, a gesture of thanks or farewell. I raised one hand from the steering wheel. The taxi door closed itself gently. For a few moments I stayed where I was, engine idling low, while the passengers stood under the right rain. Around them, the balcony steadied. Not fixed, exactly. Nothing in that city was fixed in the way ground cities mean it. But the rails stopped trembling, the awning stopped steaming, and the lamp began to sort the drops as if the evening could continue from where it had been interrupted. When I turned back toward the weather lane, a little blue mist remained on the rear window. The seat held the faint curve of a shell support and 3 drops of rain that did not roll, though the taxi was moving. I left them there. Some passengers pay in official currency, some in route tokens, some in signatures made of vapor. That passenger paid properly before leaving, but the drops felt like part of the fare as well. The meter settled to neutral, then lifted again almost immediately. This time, no rain crossed the windshield. The dashboard went silent. Not ordinary silent, deep silent, as if every small noise in the cab had stepped backward. The radio dial dimmed. The translation moths folded themselves under the tin lid without being told. Even the tires seemed to remember that some worlds prefer to be approached without friction. A pale blue line appeared across the meter glass. The next call did not ask for weather. It asked for quiet. Quiet calls do not arrive like other fares. They do not flash the roof light, warm the meter, leave rain on the windshield, or press an address into the driver's glove. A quiet call removes what is unnecessary until the cab becomes aware of the empty place where a passenger is waiting. The radio dial went dark first. Then the dashboard clock stopped, pretending to choose an hour. The engine softened until I could hear the passenger seat reshaping itself before anyone had opened the door. I turned the taxi away from the weather lanes and followed the pale blue line across the meter glass. It led past the outer rain levels, beyond a string of small maintenance moons, and into the cold side of a local route where sound was treated as luggage and charged accordingly. Before entering, I closed the glove compartment, folded the loose root prayers under the visor, and asked the translation moths to remain asleep. Their wings can be too loud for certain passengers, even when they are trying to help. The gate into the crystal system was not a door. It was a pause between 2 notes. The taxi entered by becoming part of that pause for as long as the wheels could bear it, and then we were moving over a valley of pale stone and blue-black sky. The world below was covered in crystal forests, not the sharp ornamental kind sold in station windows, but living structures rooted deep in old ice. Their branches rose in columns, shelves, hollow arcs, and listening spires. Some caught starlight and held it, some gave it back in softened pulses. Between the forests lay valleys where a sound could travel for days if no one interrupted it. The passenger waited at the edge of one such valley, where the road was no road at all, only a matte strip of stone kept free of loose echoes. They were taller than the taxi but folded low, a being made of crystal roots braided around a dim inner glow. No face looked toward me, but several fine root strands lifted when I arrived, feeling the shape of the cab through vibration. I turned off the headlights before the passenger asked, "Light on that world could sound if it struck the wrong surface." I opened the rear door without a chime. The back seat became a shallow mineral tray lined with stillness felt. The passenger entered slowly, not stepping so much as arranging weight. Each root that touched the floor sent a tiny pulse through the cab. The taxi accepted it, then made itself quieter. By the time the door closed, I could hear my own hands on the steering wheel. "Radio off?" I asked. The passenger's inner glow shifted once, which the dashboard translated as gratitude. I set the route for the western Echo Valley. The address did not have numbers. It had a held tone, a direction of cold, and a memory of sleep that had been placed where it did not belong. The meter needle moved from neutral to misremembered, then trembled against a thin mark used only for acoustic returns. For a while we drove without speech. That was not awkward. Silence with a crystal root passenger is not an absence of conversation. It is the condition that lets conversation begin safely. Outside, the forest passed in tall blue silhouettes. Some trees rang faintly from old weather. Others had been wrapped in dark cloth by caretakers so their branches would not answer passing vehicles. Far above, a small moon dragged its light across the valley and made the road appear for a few breaths at a time. After a long stretch, I asked, would it help to tell me what the echo should not touch? The passenger's glow lowered, then steadied. When they answered, the words did not come from a mouth. They arrived through the seat, the dashboard, the steering wheel, and the bones of my wrists, translated into language only after I had already felt their meaning. On my world, they said, we do not put children to sleep by making sound. We put sound to sleep first, and the children follow. A colony rests when its echoes lie down in the correct order. The high branches keep watch. The low roots hold the day's work. The hollow trunks hum until all the rough edges have been rounded away. Only then do the young dim their inner lights. They paused, and the taxi rolled more slowly without being asked. The road had begun to descend into a valley where old echoes slept under frost. I kept both hands steady and let the tires choose the softest track. Our routines are made of alignment, the passenger continued. At morning we wake the north-facing branches first because they remember cold accurately. We clear frost from the listening shelves. We turn broken echoes away from nursery hollows. We polish the quiet stones with dry moss. We do not speak across a valley unless the far side is ready to receive us. A careless greeting can keep a whole stand of young ones bright until moonset. A dropped tool can become a proverb if it rings in the wrong gorge. I thought of taxi horns, station announcements, loose coins and cup holders, and all the ordinary noises I had once considered harmless. The cab seemed to think of them too. Something under the dashboard tightened a screw by itself. The passenger's root strands settled deeper into the stillness felt. 3 nights ago, I carried a sleep song from the lower nursery to the western Echo Valley. It was not a song as many species mean the word. It had no melody for air. It was a shaped quiet, a pattern of dimming, a way for the day's bright thoughts to fold without cracking. I was tired. There had been a storm of small meteors, and every branch in the eastern forest had spent the afternoon ringing. I took the old path through the blue ravine because it was shorter. Outside the window, a ravine opened beneath us, its sides lined with crystal plates like pages of a book no one should close too quickly. The passenger's glow flickered when they saw it, and I slowed again. In the blue ravine, they said, there is an answering wall. It is kind, but too eager. If one carries a fresh sleep song past it, the wall may believe the song has been offered. I knew this. Everyone knows this. I still passed too near. The wall took the gentlest part of the song and returned the rest to me. I did not notice at once. A missing quiet does not announce itself loudly. I placed the song in the western valley, bowed to the nursery stones, and went home. The route line bent left, away from a cluster of ringing trees. I followed it. In the rearview mirror, the passenger's glow had dimmed to the color of moonlit ice. What happens when the right quiet returns? The passenger held the echo stone close. The young ones will not know. They will only sleep until morning reaches them properly. That is how we will know the repair was kind. Then they moved toward the ravine, not hurrying, not dragging, each root finding a place between old echoes. The answering wall brightened as they approached. No great sound came from it. Only a pale shimmer, almost less than light. That night, they continued, the young ones slept, but not deeply. They rose before the first cold branch woke. Their lights brightened too early. They asked whether morning had forgotten them. The elders went through the nursery hollows and found no danger. The shelves were aligned, the roots were warm, no predator echo had entered. The second night was the same. By the third, even the old trunk sounded thin. It is not harmful to wake early once. 3 times makes a colony feel as if time has begun pulling at the roots. I asked, the missing part stayed in the ravine? Yes. It has been sleeping the wrong wall. There was no anger in the passenger's answer, only weariness and a careful shame. I had carried passengers who missed trains, ceremonies, births, departures, rain layers, and the last ferry to moons that only dock once a year. The shame of a crystal root was quieter than most, but it filled the cab from floor to roof and made the meter needle tremble. I turned the heater lower. Warm air can make old echoes lift. The passenger continued after a while. In our colony, errors are repaired by returning the missing shape, not by blaming the carrier. Still, the carrier must go. Another could retrieve it, but the ravine would hear a different route and hold the quiet more tightly. The wall knows my mistake. It will give the missing part back only if I arrive without excuses. The taxi passed through a grove where each crystal trunk held a dim sleeping light. The windows softened the view so the passenger would not hear too many reflections. Ahead, the western Echo Valley opened in a wide bowl of blue darkness. At its far edge stood the blue ravine, the answering wall rising like a frozen wave. The road ended before it, not abruptly, but respectfully. Some places do not want wheels too near. I stopped where the route line faded. The passenger did not move immediately. Several route strands lifted toward the door, then lowered again. Outside, the ravine was almost silent, but not empty. The missing quiet waited there. I could feel it now, a softness caught in the wrong stone, like a blanket folded in a public corridor. "Do you need the meter left running?" I asked. "No," the passenger said. "This is close enough to count as arrival. The rest must be carried without fare." I turned the meter off. The cab became even quieter. Before leaving, the passenger drew a small echo stone from within the braided roots. It was dull, pale, and shaped like something worn smooth by careful holding. "This is the part that remained with me," they said. "When the wall returns the missing quiet, the stone will become heavy. Then I will take both back to the nursery valley and place the song where it should have rested." The rear door opened without sound. Cold entered the taxi in a clean sheet. The passenger stepped onto the matte stone and unfolded to full height beneath the blue moon. For the first time, I saw how many fine roots made up the body, each one listening in a slightly different direction. They turned once toward the taxi, and their inner glow pulsed softly. I asked one last question, because the valley seemed wide enough for it. The passenger stood before it and bowed until their roots touched the ground. I looked away then. Some apologies are not for drivers, even when drivers have carried them. When the passenger returned, the echo stone had become visibly heavier. They held it with both root clusters and moved as one who must not drop what had finally forgiven them. I drove them to the nursery valley in complete silence. No radio, no heater, no loose thought if I could help it. At the edge of the lower hollows, they left the taxi and carried the restored sleep song into a stand of crystal trunks where small inner lights were already dimming. The fare appeared on the meter only after the passenger had vanished among the roots. It was not large. Quiet repairs rarely are, by the company's reckoning. The back seat held a thin crescent of frost and one small tone that faded before I could hear it fully. I waited until the tone dissolved into the upholstery. Then I breathed normally again, started the engine, and let the taxi roll back toward the open route. By the time I reached the system gate, the radio dial had remembered itself. It glowed faintly, waiting for permission. I left it off. The cab had learned something from the crystal root passenger, and I did not want to disturb it too soon. The next call came not as sound, not as rain, and not as pressure behind the ear. It came as a smell: warm herbs, wet wood, peppered steam, and something like a kitchen door opening across a marsh after dark. The smell entered the cab before the call lamp changed. That happens with marsh moon fares. Their addresses travel through appetite, memory, damp wood, and the old paths between kitchens. A driver may be parked near a cold crystal gate with no moon in sight and the windows sealed against vacuum, and still the cab will suddenly smell of simmered reed hearts, peppered oil, and a doorway that has been opened for someone expected. The meter needle lifted, not toward distance, but toward warm return, a market used mostly for kitchens, nests, sick rooms, and certain libraries where soup was part of the cataloging system. I opened the vent only halfway. Too much scent at once can confuse the taxi, and the taxi had a weakness for supper routes. It liked them better than quarry moons, tax offices, and any station where passengers argued with luggage. The roof light changed to a low amber green. On the passenger side window, steam gathered in branching lines, writing no letters but clearly making a request. Pickup: outer reed platform of a marsh moon, passenger carrying covered pot. Destination: home scent mislaid. Door should open toward warm vapor. Do not ask to taste. That last instruction was probably for me, but it may have been for the taxi. I turned the cab toward the smell, and the quiet of the crystal system fell away behind us. The route opened through a soft brown gate that looked like smoke and behaved like a dock. For a few breaths, the tires rolled over nothing but warmth. Then we descended under the enormous striped belly of a gas giant, where one of its marsh moons turned slowly through golden haze. The moon was mostly water, reeds, floating walkways, and low houses built on patient stilts. It was evening there. Lamps hung in blue glass jars above the channels. Steam rose from cook fires and drifted sideways instead of upward, following the tide of household scents. The roads were not roads so much as braided warmths. Some smelled of salted root, some of wet pepper bark, some of sweet black lily. Each one meant a neighborhood, a family, a kitchen, or a promise to return before the last bowl was covered. The passenger waited on an outer reed platform, holding a covered pot with 4 careful arms, while the other 2 held a travel shawl around a soft shell body. They were low, broad, and gentle-looking, with many fingers and eyes that blinked in pairs. Their shell had the color of river clay after rain. Around the pot lid, steam escaped in tiny, cautious threads, then curled back as if remembering it had been told not to wander. I pulled close and opened the rear door toward the warm vapor, not the open channel. The back seat reshaped into a low padded basin with side rests for extra arms and a steadying ring for the pot. The passenger climbed in slowly, apologizing with gestures before speech arrived through the translation moths. "No apology needed," I said. "There is always some apology needed when one travels with supper," the passenger replied, placing the pot into the ring. "Supper has its own opinions about being moved." The cab filled with the smell of green herbs, soft mud, toasted seed, and something smoky enough to make the dashboard clock look hungry. I sealed the driver's side vent before it could become personal. The meter needle leaned toward home adjacent, then wavered. "Do all homes on your moon smell different?" I asked. The passenger settled all 6 hands around the pot, not touching the lid, only keeping company with it. "Of course," they said, "otherwise no one would arrive where they were loved." They said it so plainly that I almost apologized for asking. On the Marsh moon, the passenger told me, no house trusted numbers completely. Numbers were useful for storage bins, tide posts, and arguments about how many dumplings a guest had already eaten, but they were poor at finding doors. The houses stood on stilts, and the walkways shifted when reeds grew thick or storms pushed channels into new shapes. A map could tell you where a house had stood last season, but a kitchen could tell you where it wanted you tonight. Children learned their home scent before they learned the names of the moons. They followed it from nursery hammocks to supper platforms, from bath pools to sleeping rooms, from festival docks back to the right door when fog swallowed the bells. "Each home keeps a direction pot," the passenger said. "Not the largest pot and not the finest. The direction pot is usually dented because a perfect pot has not yet listened to enough mistakes. Into it we place the base scent of the house, the root we always dry above the stove, the pepper bark from the first platform post, the smoke from our own fire, the oil touched to the door hinge, and sometimes a thread from the sleeping mat of the eldest creature who still remembers the first version of the kitchen." Outside the taxi, the marsh lanes glowed in layered scent. I could not see them all, but the dashboard could. It showed roots as soft colors rather than lines, green for reed heart suppers, violet for fish broth neighborhoods, gold for festival spice, pale blue for houses where someone was ill and needed bland steam. The passenger watched the colors gather on the glass and gave a small hum of approval. "You have driven here before," they said. "Enough to keep the windows closed at the wrong times." A wise driver. An instructed one. The passenger's shell warmed with amusement, but they did not laugh loudly. The pot between their hands gave a small puff. All 6 hands tightened, then relaxed. "Our trouble began with kindness," they continued. "Most trouble worth repairing does. A neighbor 2 walkways east had been ill. Their house scent had thinned, and visitors kept missing the door, arriving instead at the eel washer's steps or the empty platform where a festival tent had stood last month. I was preparing evening broth for my own house when a helper came asking for a spoon of our steadying base. A little home scent, only enough to remind their direction pot how to call people back. I steered around a slow barge of floating gourds. The taxi's wheels had become shallow water skids without mentioning it. Marsh moons appreciate a vehicle that knows when not to make a point of adapting. "I gave it," the passenger said. That was correct. But I had also been preparing return broth for my household because several young ones were expected from the outer reed lessons, and one elder had gone to the steam baths without a scent thread. I had 2 ladles in my hands, one for neighborly lending and one for home returning. Someone asked a question. Someone moved a basket. The tide bell sounded twice. I answered the wrong steam. And I placed my own house's direction scent into the neighbor's soup. The passenger looked down at the pot as if the error might still be floating on the lid. By the time I noticed, half the walkway had followed supper to the wrong door. My young ones arrived at the neighbor's platform, cheerful and confused. The elder came from the steam baths, sniffed once, and declared that either the house had moved or the soup had become ambitious. 2 guests waiting for our evening meal sat politely in the neighbor's kitchen for several breaths before anyone admitted the benches were the wrong height. The ill neighbor, who had not laughed in days, laughed into the broth and improved somewhat. So there was good in it, but the roads became tangled. It is not that no other house has root or smoke or pepper bark. Many do. It is not even that the ingredients are secret. Nothing important stays secret in a marsh neighborhood. A house scent is true because everyone agrees not to follow it unless they are being called. That is the courtesy. The smell opens a path, but the guests must still know whether the path is theirs. We passed over a channel where houses stood close together, each one breathing a different supper into the air. I began to understand how serious the mistake was. It was not only a misplaced smell, it was an address borrowed too strongly by another door. On a world where welcome moved through steam, the passenger had accidentally told the neighborhood that home was elsewhere. The meter needle drifted toward misremembered. The pot gave another small puff. I tried to correct it at once, the passenger said. That was unwise. A home scent cannot be snatched back while everyone is still hungry. I added door hinge oil. Too much. I added sleeping mat thread. Too soon. I boiled pepper bark until the walkway sneezed. This made our own house smell like an argument about belonging. The neighbor's house continued to smell gently like us, but with better manners. That line was delivered with such weary dignity that I chose not to smile where the mirror could catch me. What is in the pot now? I asked. The part that should have waited, they said. The base after cooling. The scent of our own doorway when no one is trying to prove it. Reed root, low smoke, hinge oil, bath steam from the returning elder's shawl, a scraped bit of the supper bench, and 3 breaths taken in the kitchen after everyone stopped explaining whose fault it was. The taxi moved from the public scent lanes into a quieter braid of channels. Here the houses were lower, lamps smaller, steam softer. The dashboard colors thinned until only 2 paths remained, one warm and overbright, one dim but steady. The passenger touched the lid of the pot with 2 fingers. The steady path brightened a little. Left? I asked. Not left, they said, toward the smell that is not apologizing. I turned toward the dim path. The moon outside grew quieter. Reeds brushed the underside of the taxi. In the distance, a cluster of houses stood on stilts around a shared platform. One smelled lively and wrong, crowded with borrowed welcome. Another, a little farther off, gave almost no scent at all. Its lamps were lit, but uncertain. A small line of beings stood along the walkway between the two, holding bowls, shawls, and covered spoons, as if waiting for the road itself to make up its mind. The passenger leaned toward the window. Their shell darkened with feeling. There, they said. That is ours. The quiet one trying not to call too loudly. I slowed before the platform and let the taxi hover just above the damp boards. The door opened toward the softer house. No one outside rushed forward. That told me the neighborhood had learned something already. The passenger gathered the pot with 4 hands and the shawl with 2, then paused before leaving. Do you know, they said, what makes a house scent true? I waited, 'cause it was not a question for me. They stepped onto the platform. The waiting beings shifted, but did not crowd. The passenger carried the pot to the quieter house and set it on the threshold. I could see the lid lift by itself, only a little. Steam moved out, low and careful. It did not rush into the neighborhood. It went first to the door hinge, then along the floorboards, then up the posts, then back toward the beings waiting with bowls. One by one, their faces changed with recognition, not surprise. Recognition. The difference matters. The house breathed in. Then the scent spread, not loudly, not possessively, but with the soft confidence of a place no longer trying to prove itself. The line of waiting neighbors divided gently. Those who belonged to the house stepped forward. Those who belonged elsewhere smiled, turned, and followed their own kitchen smells home. Across the walkway, the ill neighbor's house kept a little borrowed warmth, but no longer enough to confuse the road. The passenger looked back at the taxi and lifted one spoon in thanks. I raised 2 fingers from the wheel. The fare appeared on the meter as a modest amount, plus a notation I had seen only on Food Moon routes: warmth retained in upholstery. The company never knew how to charge for that. I did not mind. For several light years after I left the Marsh Moon, the cab smelled faintly of reed root, low smoke, and a house correcting itself without shame. I kept the windows closed until the scent settled. Some passengers leave water, some frost, some silence. This one left the feeling that a door can apologize by opening properly. The route from the Marsh Moon carried me past the shadow of its gas giant and back into the wider night. I reset the seat, checked the pot ring for lingering steam, and let the meter cool. The dashboard clock chose an hour, changed its mind, and chose none. The next call arrived while the taxi was still holding the last passenger's warmth. A feather pressed itself against the outside of the windshield. It was not blown there. There was no wind. It lay flat against the glass, dark at first, then brightening from within as thin lines appeared along its surface. Streets, rivers, courtyards, a lake I had never seen, a landing mark crossed out and redrawn somewhere else. The meter needle moved to misremembered, then home adjacent, then a rarer mark near the far edge. Moved while loved. I set the wipers not to wipe. Some passengers arrive as weather, some as quiet, some as supper. This one arrived as memory trying to find where the city had gone. The feather did not leave the windshield until I accepted the call. It stayed there through the outer route, pressed flat against the glass as if the vacuum outside were only a window pane and not a place where ordinary things lost all interest in staying whole. The lines inside it kept changing. Streets moved under the vein. A river bent and became a stair. Courtyards opened, closed, and opened somewhere else. At the tip of the feather, a small landing mark glowed, crossed itself out, and reappeared beside a lake. I touched the glass near it, not on it. The taxi received the address as a memory rather than a location. Old landing line. South slope, no longer present. Follow feather map until remembered city answers. Passenger waiting at abandoned descent ring. Wings tired. Do not rely on coordinates. Coordinates are useful when the place wants to be found by them. Many places do. Stations, ports, mining belts, administrative moons, certain hotels that believe accuracy is a moral virtue. But there are worlds where coordinates are only the dried shell of a truth. They tell you where something stood, not where it has continued becoming. I turned the taxi toward the feather's map. The route led away from the Marsh Moon's warm lanes and into a region of slow planets, where several worlds kept seasonal agreements with their own landscapes. The passenger's world turned below a pale violet star. From above, it looked calm enough. Lakes, ridges, silver fields, long cloud shadows. Then the surface shifted under the starlight, and I saw that the cities were moving. Not quickly. Not like machines. The cities moved the way a herd moves while half asleep, the way a forest line changes over generations, the way a person adjusts a blanket without waking. Blocks of houses leaned together on broad foundation feet. Towers folded their staircases inward before taking a step. Streets loosened at the edges, then braided themselves again along a new slope. Bridges lifted their arches like sleeping animals moving one paw. Lamps traveled in clusters so no neighborhood had to cross the dark alone. The abandoned descent ring waited on a south slope that was no longer a city edge. Grass had begun to grow between its signal stones. 3 old landing lights blinked in sequence out of habit, though no current traffic lane ended there. Beside the ring stood the passenger. They were a memory migration bird, taller than the taxi roof when folded and wider than a small house when not. Their feathers lay in layered maps across the body. Dark blues, pale silvers, lines of old streets, specks of roof color, river curves, little marks that shifted when the bird breathed. Their beak was long but gentle, and their eyes held the tired patience of someone who had reached the right place at the wrong season. I opened the rear door on the side facing the old landing line. The seat reshaped into a deep perch with wing space folded into the doorframe. The passenger lowered themselves carefully, tucking wings, tail, and maps into the cab without losing any dignity. The feather on the windshield dissolved and reappeared along one of their shoulders. "Coordinates failed?" I asked. "They were faithful to yesterday," the passenger said. "That is not the same as useful." I set the meter to memory route. The needle moved at once to misremembered, then hovered near moved while loved. The passenger watched it with one bright eye. "Does your city move far every season?" I asked. "Far is a word for ground that believes in staying," they said. "Our cities move as far as the year asks." After that, they began to tell me how a city learns to walk. On their planet, a city is not founded once. It is persuaded to remain near its people while weather, grazing light, old grief, and soil fatigue change around it. The first builders do not drive pillars deep into the earth and declare victory. They make feet for the foundations, hinges for the bridges, loosening seams for streets, and dream cords for windows. They teach the city how to sleep in one place without forgetting how to rise. A young city trembles when it moves. An old city steps so slowly that soup barely trembles in bowls. Children learn the migration paths before they learn fixed directions, the passenger said. They know that the bakery quarter prefers east-facing slopes after seed rain. They know the blue roof houses grow restless when the lake fog thickens. They know not to leave marbles in streets during turning season, because a marble may arrive in another district with no explanation and cause a family argument that lasts until frost. The taxi followed a low route above the sleeping fields. Below us, the current city moved in fragments of lamplight. A row of houses took one careful step, waited for a bridge to catch up, then settled again. A market square loosened its paving stones and turned toward a different wind. A school tower lowered itself by 2 windows to keep level with the children's dormitories. None of it looked hurried. None of it looked entirely still. The passenger continued, voice soft and slightly hollow, as if the words were passing through long feathers before becoming sound. Most addresses on our planet are given in memory, not position. A letter may be sent to the kitchen where the first winter soup was burned, 3rd shelf above laughter. A visitor may be told to follow the smell of wet roof tiles after the bell that used to hang beside the old pond. Couriers carry not only parcels, but corrections. This house is no longer below the red mill. The red mill has become 2 mills, and one is now a nursery. The aunt whose porch you seek has taught her porch to face morning. Go there. I thought of my meter and its small amber marks. Home adjacent, weather crossed, misremembered, not yet. None of them seemed strange enough for what the passenger was describing, yet all of them were trying. The passenger shifted one wing, revealing a line of tiny glowing marks along the inner feathers. "We are a remembering species," they said, "not because we have better memories than others. Perhaps ours are worse, because they will not stay where placed. Each season, we fly the old descent lines to remind the city where it has been. We do not command it back. That would be cruel. We only greet the places that held us. An old landing line is like an elder. It need not be used every day to remain part of the family." "Today you went to an old line," I said. "Yes." The taxi passed over the south slope where I had picked them up. From above, the abandoned ring looked small and careful, still blinking where no one needed it. The passenger looked down at it for a long while. "No," the passenger said. "Children will visit it during memory lessons. Couriers will still bow when passing. Grass will grow there, and the old lights will blink until they become firefly posts. Nothing loved is required to remain useful in the same way." They climbed out slowly, unfolding beside the lake. The city nearest us took one careful step while they stood there, and the passenger adjusted without surprise, lifting one foot and setting it down where the street would be after the movement finished. "I was late returning from a northern memory weather," they said. "There were storm shelves over the ridge, and my wing maps changed in the wet. When I reached the south slope, I expected the city lights below me. I had followed that descent since my first full migration. The bakery roofs, the lakeward stair, the narrow blue alley where young birds practice folding their wings without knocking over laundry. All of it should have been there. Instead, there was grass, 3 old lights, and a wind that remembered my name better than the city did. I did not answer. Some passenger silences are places to park. I knew the city had not abandoned me, they continued. A city that moves is not unfaithful. It is alive. But tired wings think differently from wise minds. I landed badly. I stood in the old ring and waited for windows to send a dream, but the windows were elsewhere and sleeping. I tried to read the new route in my feathers, but rain had blurred the lake marks. That is why I called a taxi. Not to be taken to coordinates, to be driven slowly enough for memory to catch up. The passenger lifted one wingtip and touched the window. Outside, the city's current path appeared as a faint line between moving districts. It did not glow exactly, it became more believable. I asked, what should I follow? The place where the old descent line feels least lonely. That was not the worst direction I'd ever received. I drove lower. The taxi skimmed above fields where foundation prints from previous seasons remained in the grass. There were round marks where towers had rested, long marks where markets had stretched, square hollows where courtyards had held rain. The city had been there and not stayed, but its leaving had not erased its having been. The passenger watched each mark pass beneath us. Some made their feathers brighten, some made them darken. The meter needle moved in tiny, uncertain motions, trying to read longing as navigation. Slower, the passenger said. I slowed. Below, a line of old roof tiles had been set upright along a ridge, not as ruins but as reminders. The passenger hummed once, and a district ahead answered with 3 window lights. Not bright, not calling loudly, only saying yes. That was ours once. We turned toward the answer. The city lay beside a lake now, or partly beside it. One quarter had already reached the shore. Another still crossed the low meadow behind. The bridges were moving last, which seemed polite. Streets stretched and relaxed between sections like cloth being laid without wrinkles. Lanterns hung close to the ground to keep from swaying during steps. Along the outer edge, several descent lines had been marked in soft light, each one curving toward a different kind of arrival. The passenger leaned forward, feathers shifting faster. Not that one, they said as a bright line appeared near the east roofs. That is for trading wings. Not that one either. Too young. It smells of new paint. I followed the lake's edge. The taxi moved so slowly that the meter almost forgot to measure. Then the passenger made a low sound, and one old line on the water side answered. It was faint, partly hidden by reeds, and curved around a place where no landing platform stood yet. But the air above it carried the smell of wet roof tiles and the warm dust of a bakery that had moved without losing its oven. There, the passenger said. The meter needle slid from misremembered to near, then beyond near into a mark I had seen only a few times. Still belonging. I brought the taxi down beside the faint line. The ground under us was soft, so the wheels widened and rested lightly. The rear door opened toward the lake breeze. For several breaths, the passenger did not move. Their feathers had changed. The blurred marks from the rain were clearing, and new lines were drawing themselves between old streets and current lamps. The city had not returned to the south slope. It had answered from where it now stood. Would the old landing ring be left behind? I asked. A window in a blue-roofed house opened and released a small dream. A ribbon of warm air carrying the smell of laundry, lake fog, and something baked too long at the edges. The passenger lowered their head. Home? I asked. Close enough for sleep, they said. Home can finish arriving by morning. That seemed wise, and I let it be the last word between us. They paid with a memory feather no larger than my thumb. It lay on the dashboard and showed, for one moment, the old south slope and the new lake edge at the same time. Then it folded itself into a plain gray receipt and slipped into the meter slot. I stayed until the passenger had joined the moving street. They did not hurry. The city did not hurry. A row of lamps adjusted their height as the bird passed beneath them, and one bridge in the distance lowered its arch to match a road that had not quite arrived yet. It was a calm thing to watch, a city and a citizen forgiving each other for changing. When I lifted from the lakeside, the taxi smelled faintly of marsh herbs, held a crescent of crystal frost in the rear seam, and carried 3 blue drops of rain that still had not rolled. The back seat also held one small down feather, which the upholstery refused to let me brush away. I left it. By then, the cab was less a vehicle than a quiet shelf for the night's remainders. No new call came immediately. That was rare enough that I noticed. The route ahead opened toward the orbital taxi stand, and the meter needle lowered toward neutral, with the reluctance of a thing that had enjoyed being useful. I drove without radio. Stars moved through the upper windshield in slow lines. The dashboard clock chose several possible hours, then settled on none of them, perhaps out of respect for the worlds that measured return by rain, echo, supper, and migrating streets. At the stand, I parked in the outer lane where tired taxis could cool before accepting another fare. Other drivers rested nearby. One cab snored through its exhaust pipe. Another had its trunk open while a mechanic argued gently with a suitcase that had grown roots. The city below turned an ordinary night, though ordinary means very little after a shift like that. I made the closing checks. Atmosphere seals, damp but sound. Door memory, a little sentimental, acceptable. Seat permissions. Return to neutral after some persuasion. Translation moths. Sleeping in the tin, with one wing smelling faintly of peppered steam. Trunk dimension, current. Shadow license. Still in the visor, shadow somewhat stretched but valid. Meter. Balanced. Then I looked at the back seat. The raindrops from the first passenger remained near the window, each holding a tiny blue-gray reflection. The crystal frost from the second passenger had melted into nothing visible, but the silence it left behind still shaped the air. The marsh moon scent had settled into the fabric so gently that I knew I would notice it again on some colder night. The memory bird's feather lay along the seam where the seat became a perch when needed. I could have cleaned all of it. Drivers are supposed to begin each shift ready for the next passenger, and readiness often means clearing away what does not belong. But not everything left behind is mess. Some traces are proof that the cab carried someone carefully enough for the world not to spill them entirely. So I cleaned only what might trouble the next fare. I dried the floor, emptied the vent filter, checked the seals, and left the raindrops until they chose to roll. I left the feather until the upholstery released it. I left the silence because there was no polite way to remove it. The old driver who trained me once said that every fare is 2 journeys. The first is from pickup to destination. The second is from the passenger's idea of home to the place that can receive it. Some nights, the 2 journeys are nearly the same. A worker to a station, a student to a moon dormitory, a courier to a gate. Other nights, the second journey is longer than the first, and the driver mostly sits at the wheel while the passenger finds the words to travel it. That night, I had driven through rain that remembered a balcony, quiet that needed to be returned to a nursery, supper that corrected a house, and a city that had moved without leaving love behind. None of the fares were dramatic by company standards. No emergency surcharge, no meteor delay, no hazard bonus. Just 4 passengers trying to reach places that could only be found by listening to what they meant when they said home. I turned off the roof light. The taxi became an ordinary dark shape in the stand, which is one of its best talents. Beyond the glass, stars leaned close to the lane and then moved on. Below us, the night side of the city kept its lamps. Somewhere, other drivers were receiving calls. A fog clerk late for a moon ferry, a hive musician with too many instruments, a child asleep inside a suitcase that had taken the wrong elevator, perhaps someone standing under rain that was almost right. I rested both hands on the steering wheel and let the shift end slowly. People think taxi work is carrying strangers through distance. Sometimes it is. But distance was never the hard part. The hard part was arriving without bruising the idea of where someone belonged. When the meter finally went dark, it did not click. It sighed. Marlowe returns now, and the studio feels a little like the inside of that cab. Rain at one window, a hush in the corner, something warm from a far kitchen, and a small feather that seems to remember more than one address. If there is a world you have wondered about, a place you have imagined, or a quiet corner of another universe you would like us to look into, you may leave it in the comments. Marlowe has a strange habit of gently opening doors we did not even know existed. For tonight, may every road you take know how to receive you. May every window recognize the weather you bring. And may home, wherever it has moved, finish arriving by morning. This has been Marlowe's Evening Radio. Good night.